Right, thank you, Laura. I believe we're now live streaming the meeting on YouTube, so welcome to everyone. Before I formally open the meeting, I'd like to let you know if the meeting doesn't finish by 8 p.m, I shall call a break of 10 minutes in order to allow members and those watching to take part in the Festival of Light, going out onto your doorsteps with torch or candles to acknowledge the National Day of Mourning for COVID victims. Trust everyone will understand that and hopefully join in. Right, we now go to the agenda, and apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Jen Walker.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? No. So we move to the minutes of the meeting, which are on pages 1 to 8. I don't propose to go through them. I take it everyone's read them. Has anybody any comments, amendments, or have they found any typos? No? So I take it we are all in favour of those? Yes? Right, well, I shall sign those as and when I'm able to do so. Item 4 is the feedback from Scrutiny Group Chairman. But before we do that, I'd just like to report that Charlotte and I attended the Scrutiny conference at East Midlands Councils. When I say attended, I mean virtually. And we discussed the protocols and the need to align with government guidance and the fact that this should be a living document. Rushcliffe, I believe, refer to our protocols in all our decision making, so that is good. There were comments regarding the need for trust between the executive, scrutiny and senior management, and recognition that they and political parties were all working towards the same objectives of delivering the best service for our residents. We broke up into working groups and I was with Gedling and Lincoln. Gedling, it appears, have only a corporate overview group and set up working groups to deal with their items. Their meetings, therefore, are somewhat more sporadic than ours. I know we're concerned about lengthy meetings and the number of items on agendas, and I'd like to ask Jonathan to comment later on the pros and cons of the pre-meeting briefing on littering and dog fouling his group recently had in the face of a rather heavy agenda. Apparently, some councils have portfolio holders attending their meetings on a rolling programme, but I feel this is possibly duplication and that inviting portfolio holders to attend when necessary, as is our policy, leads to more focused scrutiny. I trust everyone agrees with that. Other councils would appear to have a 6 or 12 monthly monitoring meeting where the leader and deputy leader can attend to update scrutiny members on the future. Charlotte and I have talked over this and we agreed this was possibly food for thought and something to consider. These meetings, which we attend on a regular basis, are very useful because they're an exchange of ideas with other councils. And we need to be mindful that there's always room for improvement. So however good we are, we're not necessarily the best. We seem to be delivering very well for our residents at the moment, despite current problems. So we must be doing something right. And so now I move on to the group leaders who can update us on what they have been doing. And as I've just mentioned, Jonathan had a a briefing, which was new to us, I'll ask him to open up the debate.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the pre-briefing we had was actually the second we've had. The first one was on the young and positive futures before our first meeting. The reason for that, Chairman, it's different slightly because that was done because our group was virtually all new members, bar one other who'd only been on the council for a year. So I felt it best to let the councillors understand about the programme before we obviously took the key decision whether we recommended we continue with it or not. So, but the one we had ahead of our last meeting was for the specific purpose to make sure we could scrutinise all three items on the nights that we had for our full meeting, because we knew it would go on long, and it did. It went on beyond 10 o'clock as it was. If we hadn't had the pre-briefing, I think we would have been there till at least 11 o'clock. So I did find it very useful. And also I think what was key was doing it online, having other members able to join and see the information as well, because very conscious that it was a topic that a lot of councillors who weren't on the committee had an interest in. And I did get feedback from a couple of councillors. They actually really found it useful to see the briefing and to send me questions to ask and to ask questions of officers. So I do think it's something that needs using, but my one caveat to that would be the issue I think we're having overall is that the current meeting cycle perhaps isn't right in terms of the amount of items going on to some committees, and having these pre-briefings, to be honest, the one we had then was just because the agenda was so big and meaty, which again, love having a big agenda, lots of stuff to do, but I think going forwards, if we're having two lots of meetings, one for a pre-briefing because the agenda is too big, then ergo that shows to me we should have another meeting itself of scrutiny where we could actually cover all the topics itself in one go. So I think that's something that we just need to be mindful of, rather than perhaps fudging or getting around things. We need to look at the root cause of why we're having to do it. But I do think pre-briefings have their use, especially if it's on a big item, which potentially, I say big item in context of all the items scrutinised are important, but especially when you've got new members on a scrutiny group or a new council, especially, I think they're very pertinent. But I would just want to make that point, Chairman, that what I made at last meeting, and I know Vice Chairman Variance all agreed on as well, that we actually need to look at the meetings going forward just to make sure that we're not having to do these workarounds to get around the current cycle.
Okay, fine, thank you very much. And there's nothing further you want to add in terms of update for the work you've been doing or have in the future?
Chairman, I can, if you want me to do now, I can go through our last meeting. If you want me to put that all together into one, so I didn't know if you were going through the usual order of committees. So our last meeting was on the 28th of January. We've not had a corporate overview group since then. And again, this was the weighty agenda that we talked about. So first item was reviewing the Walton golf course performance. So as I think most members are aware, we have a golf course that loses us around £50,000 per annum. But yet it's obviously the most valuable asset the council owns. So it's also very important that we scrutinise it. An independent review was undertaken by KKP on behalf of the council, so we could be absolutely, mudslingers, so to speak, that we'd already made minds up on anything else. This independent report was telling us what they recommended going forward. It was recommended that we do keep a sporting facility at the golf course. Obviously Sport England are very keen for that as well in terms of any future planning application there, but in its current guise, it can't continue because not only is it losing money, it's not actually meeting the needs of the golfers who are using it, as is being tested to by meetings with various people on the golf course. And I can speak myself from when I used to be on the committee as one of the borough council representatives of the golf course. The feedback I got from all the golfers then was it wasn't fit for purpose, and that was 3 or so years ago. So what the proposal that we were looking at, which went forward to Cabinet, which has since been agreed by Cabinet, was to do a business plan for the golf course that to look at all the possible options, including upgrading the driving range facility and the clubhouse to a proper community facility, which is very much welcome over our local residents because obviously we know how big Walton's got to, and although we're proposing another community centre on the other side of the development at Sharp Hill, on this side, as I call it, of the road. So I say that because it's where I live as well, but on the other side of the road, having that community facility would really help the local residents. And also upgrading the main golf course. The par 3 is the issue we need to look at, what feature there, what the council wants to do. In terms of recommendations that went forward by Cabinet, that was to just undertake the business plan at this time. They didn't take our other recommendations forwards. It was just literally to undertake the business plan and then to come back and see where they want to go in the future. The other items, sorry, I just lost the page there, was fly tipping, dog fouling, littering, part 2. So that was the briefing we had. Main reason for that as well was because this item originally was going to be bumped back again to our meeting that takes place in April, but it had already been bumped back twice. Very conscious that they wanted to look like that the council didn't think this was an important item, which we do. We know, I'm sure we all know the amount of casework we get for people who are sick of fly tipping and dog fouling and littering. It's one of the big issues that I get in my inbox on the Borough Council side, apart from planning. I'm sure other members agree. So that's why we wanted to go through that in terms of what the council's doing. And it was actually very worthwhile because we learned about WISE, which is the programme which the company which the Borough Council have engaged to be our enforcement. And you know, the feedback already was they've managed to achieve, I think, more in January than we had done in the previous year in terms of notices given out and enforcement. So it was very much interesting to learn about that, and obviously the pilot that happened in Goton Ward as well. So really got a lot of feedback from that on the night, and we put through the recommendations, which was to endorse the work it was doing, but also we added in an extra recommendation, which was to look at a PSPO for the new estates, because at the moment, when we got our new estates being built, so you said Walton as an example, obviously I know we've got East Leek and East Bridgton and many others across the across Rushcliffe. When they've got these new estates with management companies, we don't have the enforcement powers to do the same enforcement we do in other areas. So with a PSPO, we could have that enforcement. So we've actually asked for that to be looked at by Cabinet, and I've always spoken to the portfolio holder who agrees to look at that if we can take that going forward. So really pleased to manage to get that in there. And we also made it clear as well, we need to be very proactive on the communication to remind people what their responsibilities are and the possible fines for dog fouling and littering. So I think when people actually understand it will hit them in the wallet, and perhaps they'll play ball, so to speak. So that was that one. And the final one was the Rushcliffe Equality Scheme, and it's down as part 2. The reason it's down as part 2 is because we had it come to the committee last year, but obviously it was last year, it was October, I believe, and we weren't happy with what was proposed. So we asked for it to be looked at again and come back. In terms of the plan itself, the reason we asked that to come back is because we're very much aware of, especially in recent times, that equality and what people expect from us with our equality scheme is a lot that's changed from where we were 5, 6, 7 years ago. When we looked at the former equality scheme, it looked so out of date, it was untrue. It looked like it was from 20 years ago, because that's how far society has moved on. So we were very keen to say that the equality scheme's got to reflect the current society values and what people expect and how they want to be treated. So we've got obviously Sam from East Midlands Council who's doing a lot of work on behalf of the council, as well as the transformation executive manager Leanne. And so we agreed with the equality scheme, but on the proviso that a proper action plan was put in place for what was being proposed to do. Because one criticism we had of the former equality scheme was that there was a lot of aims, but there was nothing there to say how they were going to be measured and how we can actually show at the end of it if we achieve what we set out to do. So we made it clear that this time that has to happen, because we've got to be accountable to our residents to say this wasn't just a scheme that was being done to tick a box for 4 years, put on the shelf, and we look at it again in 4 years. That's not what our residents want from us, not what we expect. So an action plan is actually due to come out later this week. I had a conversation with portfolio holder yesterday, so that's going to be coming out with clear actions. Not only is it going to be coming out, there's also going to be a consultation on those actions, and so we actually asked members of the public and fellow councillors what they think of the scheme, what they'd actually like to see going forwards, because we are going to be bringing this back in a year's time to look at again the equality scheme after it's gone through Cabinet, which I believe is going to be happening in May, based on the current cycle. That obviously that could change depending on the decision of the leader and the executive management team. But once that happens, we want to bring it back in a year with the feedback from members of the public as well, so we can look at and make sure that works. So as you can see, I spoke for a long time just now, so you can imagine how long the meetings went on for and how big the agendas were. But I think it was really useful. We covered a lot of subjects, and I want to record thanks especially to members of the Scrutiny Group who stuck with us till the late hour when we're asking all the relevant questions and kept probing to the very end. And that's it for me, Chairman, unless my Vice Chairman wants to add anything. Thank you.
If I may just say 2 things, Chair. Number one, I think The briefings were really good. I just echo what Councillor Wheeler said. If we didn't have those, the meetings will be super long. But it also gives us an opportunity to ask questions, which is really good and really dig deep. Secondly, the agenda's been quite long. At Walton Golf Course, as Councillor Wheeler mentioned, was particularly interesting, having the study done and getting information which I think would have been difficult. For example, Sport England, what they think of golf in general. So yeah, it's been busy, but it's been really good as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so I'll move now to Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had a governance scrutiny group on Thursday, the 4th of February, and members of the governance scrutiny group considered the following main items. We had the annual audit letter from Mazars, our external auditor, and they presented the annual audit letter. Apart from a delay on pension information, which is outside of Rushcliffe's control, but is a county issue, there were no issues for RBC to address. We then had a full and comprehensive internal audit progress update report provided by our internal auditors BDO, and the report was noted by members. 5 medium priority findings and 3 low priority findings were agreed with management. We then moved on to the internal audit strategy, and governance scrutiny group members approved year 2 of the 3-year internal audit strategy, and the group were updated on planned audits. We then moved on to the capital and investments strategy, and a full and comprehensive report of the capital and investment strategy from 2021-22 year to 2025-26 financial year was presented by our financial services manager, Sarah Whitaker, and members approved the report and strategy. And finally, we had the risk management report. Members were updated on progress of the risk management process, and particularly as the COVID pandemic had added to the list of risks. And following members' requests, the report contained additional detailed information, and members noted the proactive actions, and that basically summarises the meeting, which was quite satisfactory. From my own perspective, Madam Chair, if you want my view on the existence of the governance scrutiny group, it has, in the main, its own work programme already laid out as a regular meeting items to do with audits and other strategies and such like. And so I would suggest that we always have a governance scrutiny group of some description. But that's just my opinion following your comments earlier.
Thank you. Does your Vice Chairman wish to comment?
She gave her apologies, I
Oh,
believe.
she's given her apologies, of course she has. Sorry about that. So you've had no feedback from her since she gave her apologies? No. Right. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Growth and Development group met on the 20th of January. Before I go into that, sorry, I meant to say, Madam Chairman, just wanted to refer to Dave Mitchell, who has obviously been the lead officer up until now, and obviously is experiencing a a few health problems, and obviously the Chief Executive announced the reorganisation of the senior management team. So we will be welcoming Leanne Ashmore, who I believe will be becoming the lead officer. But I just wanted to place on record our thanks to Dave Mitchell for his support in the past, and really to wish him well for the future, and hope that he experiences better health soon and can enjoy his whatever he wants to do in the future. But just wanted to place on record wishing him well for the future, Madam Chairman. Sorry, I meant to do that first. So the actual meeting on the 20th of January, we looked at two items, Abbey Road Depot development and the management of open spaces in developments. So the Abbey Road Depot, which had been delayed a couple of times because we were waiting for the contracts to be signed, they were finally signed, and so the developer and the Stagfield Managing Director and also Peveril Homes and Alan Joyce Architects came to the meeting to describe the way in which the development will be designed and built, which we were very interested to see. Obviously, the whole concept of it was that it should be a beacon of development and a leader for development. And so that will include sustainable energy, the fabric of the housing, ventilation, electric vehicle charging points, making sure that they're smart homes. And we also heard that because we had in a previous meeting talked about permeable paving and rainwater harvesting, and they've also taken those on board as well. And there is very pleased to see there was a definite offer that at least 30% should be local employment to construct the houses. Let's hope that that is actually achieved. So there was some various discussion on it, but basically the development was very much welcomed. And we hope that it obviously will come to a successful completion as soon as possible. The management of open spaces, which was the second part of the topic that we discussed, it had been discussed at a previous meeting as well. And it was evident that there were because there are different developments and different formats of development and designs of development, then there are different services required within those developments. They're not all uniform and exactly the same. So in some, there may be more work required by a management company than in others. But I think the group was generally pleased to see that the average price that was charged for the annual fees was actually less than perhaps we were fearing. On average, it was just a fraction over £200. There was a variance. Some of the more expensive ones were double the cheaper ones, but however, the average price was 200, which wasn't too bad. And there was concern that management companies could actually increase these prices without much check, but we were assured that market forces would prevail and that there are more management companies, or at least there's hearty competition within management companies for this work, and therefore the competition should help keep the prices down. However, there was still concern about ensuring that there was some policing, I don't know whether policing is the right word, but trying to keep a check on what the management companies were actually charging for. So the basic result of all that is that we had three resolutions. The first one was that we have an inclusion of guidance within a supplementary planning document to ensure that there is as much consistency across the schemes as possible, given the fact that they are a requirement of planning permissions given for developments that require any open space management. And then, because we were concerned about the making sure there was some control to protect the residents against, and let's say it, who knows, in every industry, there are people who perhaps try and profiteer or take advantage of customers more than perhaps there should be. And if, I'm not saying that there are any at the moment, but if that was to happen in the future, then obviously we want to have some form of mechanism in control in place to try and give that protection. So we did task officers to investigate potential legalities as to how that could be achieved. And the final one was to ask the portfolio holder for planning to write to the Secretary of State to express our concerns and to highlight the issues, to see if there could be some national guidance that could be put in place to help control these management companies. I have to confess, I have assumed that the letter took place, but I can't actually confirm that it was actually sent, but I'm assuming it was. So I don't know whether any of the officers can actually confirm that that letter was sent, and also to confirm that officers have commenced the investigation of the legalities that I've just been talking about. That's it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Does your Vice Chairman wish to?
Oh, sorry, yes. Councillor Verdi, yes. I realise that, I think, is this your second meeting or third meeting?
It is, Councillor Clark. Yes, it is indeed.
Yes, I don't know. Perhaps you'd like to fill in whatever I've missed out.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Madam Chair, for inviting me to comment. From myself, just to report that I wasn't at the meeting. Actually, I was recovering from COVID at the time. However, just one brief comment from me on the Abbey Road depot. I think, as Councillor Clark has highlighted, we're very pleased that the development is moving forwards, and the green credentials and the showcase development that will emerge is going to be certainly something the council can promote very effectively in terms of our efforts to ensure that it has provided, as Councillor Clark highlighted, whether it's electrical charging points and so on. The only thing I wanted to really mention on that, and Councillor Clark did refer to this, but we were keen to have employment in terms of our local suppliers, and if 30% is what has been agreed at the meeting, then I'd be very keen at our future meetings just to see how we can monitor that and keep an eye on that. So, I mean, Councillor Clark, I'll pick up on that with you, obviously, before our future meetings, but I think that's really critical. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. In that event, we've considered your reports, and we'll move on now to item 5. Which is the consideration of the Scrutiny Group Work Programme. Now, I'm assuming you've all read through the, sorry, did somebody want to say something? No? Thought somebody was saying something. You've read through the work programmes, the corporate overview work programme is as in its normal format, which is basically rolling items. So I don't think there's anything that needs to be discussed on that. The governance scrutiny one, again, tend to be rolling items, as Councillor Purdue-Horan said. Growth and development, you will see there are new items on there, which we will discuss in a moment as they're on the scrutiny matrices. And again, the same applies for communities. The items on the scrutiny matrices, the first one is conservation areas. Now, I don't know whether anybody wants to make comment on what is on the matrix.
Well, Madam Chairman, not specifically the matrix, but in my view, it is something that we should be scrutinising, and I think there are concerns, and I think from a public perception point of view, and maybe from in some councillors' minds, there might be a perception as to consistency on the approach to conservation areas, especially where there are new planning applications that take place within conservation areas. So for me, it's absolutely an area that we should be looking at.
Very good. Because it definitely is for me, because being a ward councillor for several conservation areas, I'm always being lobbied about consistency within regulations on conservation areas. So for me, that's it is essential. And I notice, as we've just seen on the work programme, the officers have recommended go forward for scrutiny. We then move to tree conservation, which again, it's linked, but it goes to the heart of our green agenda. We're planting trees. Yes, that's wonderful. We need to also to conserve trees, and we need to look at where they can be planted and how we deal with TPOs, etc. Does anybody wish to comment?
Well, if I think it's down for, well, it's shown as being on the growth and development scrutiny group at the moment. I think this is possibly a topic that is cross-cutting, but maybe, and you could almost toss a coin as to whether it's growth and development or whether it's communities. I'm not precious about it at all. I wouldn't fight over it, and I'd be quite happy whichever scrutiny group it ended up on. What I would just say is that I think that the tree conservation is extremely important. It is something we should look at, perhaps not so much the supply of trees, but it's the protecting them for the future, and where there are new trees planted, especially where the council has been so good at promoting new trees planting. But the problem there is protecting them, and that the husbandry that's mentioned, the ongoing maintenance of them, and for the lifetime of the tree, not just for the 1 or 2 years, but there's no point in planting 10, 20, 50,000 trees only to find that 90% of them get either dug up, pulled out, chopped up, left or neglected, not watered, and they just die, but for whatever reasons. So I think it is one of those ongoing maintenance issues that we have to look at the new trees that we supplied, as well as protecting existing trees and trees on other people's, on other developments as well.
Thank you very much. That won't be coming forward to you until 2022, so it is quite a way ahead. So you've got lots of time to think about it. Councillor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. I do find it a bit odd. It is on the growth development, because to me it does tie in with the nature strategy, which obviously we looked at in October, I want to say, which I'm sure it was October, and actually one of the recommendations was around extending the free tree scheme for residents. So to me it does quite slot in there. So I do think perhaps obviously need to go and have a look at that and see whether it should be there. I can only imagine it's on there because conservation areas is on there for the growth one, so they've linked it in. But I was quite surprised to see those two items on that's on the growth development and not on communities, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, if we could perhaps just get an explanation on that one, just because, like I say, if it's going to tie into some of the other subjects we're looking at on communities, like I say, with the nature strategy and carbon management plan, it perhaps makes sense to tie it all in together. So we all scrutinise the same thing. But yeah, and I've got on my agenda itself as well, to say, with the subjects put on there, the police, reviewing what the police resources are, I think potentially might look to try to bring that forward. I mean, it just could depend what comes through out the matrix and from cabinet as well. Kind of like one item on each one at the moment. But I was speaking to Mr. Banks on that one just to look at that, because originally we were going to have that in April. It's one that I put through the scrutiny matrix, but obviously with PERDA we have to be very careful what could be on the April agenda, is why it's quite light at the moment compared to our usual meetings. So we'll probably look to bring that forward.
I think Charlotte's wanting to come in here and probably answer some of your queries there.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Clark pointed out, the tree conservation one really could have gone to either of the two scrutiny groups. The reason, if I can explain why I've allocated it to growth and development, and it's because I think there are about 8 or 9 different matrices coming forward in this meeting, the majority of which fall to communities naturally, just because of the topics that are there. So in order to equal the workload out, which is why both of these items, because they could cross over, they are on the growth and development agenda. Now, obviously, as the year goes on, it may well be that other items come up and we might want to readdress that in a future meeting, because I agree it could go either way. But certainly for the moment, what we would end up with is communities with a very packed and overstuffed agenda, which we have had problems with in the past, and a growth agenda that is naked, does not have any items on it at all.
Right, okay. Is that all right, Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes back to the earlier point I made right at the start of the meeting, really, isn't it, Chairman? About perhaps just need to look at where all the committees are, because I understand completely what Charlotte says and makes sense completely from a point of view. But as I say, it just feels like we're trying to do workarounds rather than actually address the main issue. That's all I just want to look at going forward. That's all. I think it's just something we're going to have to take away and perhaps come back at the next meeting.
Charlotte and I have sort of talked about scheduling, so it will be kept in mind. I think Peter Linfield wants to talk to us.
Yeah. So I don't know where the raise your hand icon. I know how to use it on Teams. I don't seem to be able to do it on Zoom.
So you click on reactions at the bottom.
Right, okay.
And it's there.
Well, I'll get a strange reaction if I do it, perhaps. But, yeah, I just really re-emphasise what Charlotte's, just a comment really on last year's and the meetings as well. Bear in mind we've had an unusual year with COVID and lots of things have been shunted about. So that's probably another reason there's been, on some meetings you've had more things than others. So for example, with the Walton golf course, the plan was to do that earlier. But unfortunately, it had to be moved because of the impact of COVID. So I think we have to accept it's been an unusual year. I'm sure you've heard the phrase lumpy and other, Matt Hancock's mentioned it a few times with vaccinations and one thing or another. It also applies to our agendas, I think, as well. So, and Charlotte's quite right what she said about obviously what we're trying to do is balance the resources out between the groups. And some of these topics, quite a few of them actually aren't necessarily just black and white. One's communities, one's in growth. And some of them you could put them in either. So they aren't just mutually exclusive in that sense.
Right, okay. Well, so long as we just keep an eye on it and we don't overload anybody, then I think we shall get on all right. Right, so we now move to resident survey. Apparently that is due late summer of this year. And I think that has been given to schedule for scrutiny, and it's going to this group. And we shall be, if we're saying that it's, the next survey is due for the late summer 2021, we're saying it's not coming to the group until March 2022.
That's right. The survey runs for 12 weeks. And then it takes us about that amount of time to get through all the data and make sure that it's meaningful and we've balanced it all out and such like. And then we don't have a meeting then until March, I think it is, next year.
Right. Okay. It just thought that, perhaps there'd been a mistake made there. Does anybody wish to comment on that? I think it's something we have to do. I don't think it really raises comment. The next item, housing delivery plan. And this is scheduled, it hasn't been, it's scheduled for the communities group again for January 2022, Jonathan. Have you any comments?
No, I just say, the housing delivery plan again, it just seems to me that potentially that could cross over to either group anyway, because obviously I know from Councillor Clark's agenda, a lot of things fit into there as well. So I'm happy for it to come to ours, but I say just, I like Councillor Clark's comments on that as well, just so he thinks he's happy with it to come to communities, or it does need to fit in with his agenda.
Yes, I'm inclined to think it might be growth.
Can I just point out that this isn't actually about building houses or any kind of planning issue. It's a much more community based. What do our communities need? What kind of housing do we need in the future? So I was advised that it sat more clearly by Dave Banks in communities. And of course, the strategic housing team is one of his teams. So I trusted his opinion on that one.
No, that's fine, Charlotte. I've also got that thing there. Like I say, it was just understanding, because I know there's been similar subjects on there we've not looked at on ours so far, but yeah, I'm more than happy to, and like I say, with the parameters you set there, makes sense.
Councillor Clark, did you wish to say anything on that?
No, well, it's one of those things that's, again, it is cross-cutting. I appreciate, and I'd already realised that it related more to the strategic aspect of housing and needs rather than bricks and mortar as such. If the workload of communities was found to be very high and growth and development very light, then growth and development could look at it, because when we're talking about housing needs and a delivery plan, you could argue that it also relates to the needs within the local plan and development for the future. It's very a very wavy, grey dotted line. There's no significant demarcation line at all. I would suspect it's probably best in whichever has got, just taking Mr. Linfield's comments on board, whichever group has the most resources available.
Just on that, sorry, Chairman, just on that as well, just to understand how that will fit in with the Greater Nottingham strategy, which obviously is, I know, has been pushed back a bit after some data issues and will be coming out later this year. Is January 2022 too late? I know it's supposed to be refreshed in 21. Just to understand from the officers on that one, just whether that perhaps needs to be brought forward to fit in with the outcomes of the review. And I can start shaking heads, so I'll shut up then, that's fine.
The timing is so that we can feed into a Rushcliffe draft strategy. There are links with the Greater Nottinghamshire strategy, but this doesn't cause us a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Right, okay. So moving on then, we go to safeguarding of vulnerable adults and children. This, of course, is a county council responsibility, but I'm assuming we are scrutinising it to make sure it's being delivered as we would like for our residents.
That, and the fact, Chairman, that the overall county-wide policy will be rewritten this year. So by scrutinising what has been delivered and what we feel our community needs, we can then feed up into the county-wide proposals for the new policy.
Right, that makes sense. But again, I think that's gone to you, Jonathan.
Absolutely, more than merrier. Pile it in, we're fine with that.
Oh dear. Then we've got the waste strategy. Oh my word, yes. This is long overdue for scrutiny. Having said that, it's the end product that is the issue, and of course that is down to the county council and their contract. But yes, this obviously feeds into the environmental bill, and again that goes to communities.
Yeah, it's worth saying, Chairman, we did have an update from Darryl Birch, because as is what's put in the matrix, we're still waiting on the environmental bill to come through government. So if it's there in time, or maybe it's 2042, we'll see which either way, then we'll go through it and progress from there. But it has had a overview, so to speak, of the group. I think it was October as well, if I remember correctly, that meeting. So yeah, more than happy to have that back when, like I say, when we actually have something we can tangibly look at and go forward with.
Okay, I feel as though I'm delivering the numbers for bingo here. The ball's coming out of the machine. Proposed new footbridge over the River Trent, which will include not only pedestrians but cyclists. As this is proposed, it very definitely needs scrutinising. And again, oh no, it isn't. That is going to growth and development.
Yeah, I got disappointed there. Gosh.
And do you have any comment, Councillor Clark?
Only really in terms of just getting the timing of it right, to be honest. Which you know, you could be too early and you can be too late. So it's just a bit like the old three bears, isn't it? So the timing needs to be just right.
The timing that we put in there at the moment is to tie in with the consultation the county will be running over the summer. So if that goes to plan as it is at the moment, this scrutiny is spot on. If their timetable gets changed, we may have to rethink that in order to make it meaningful.
Yes, so long as we can be flexible.
Yeah, and I suppose the only, well, it only links, I suppose, vaguely in with our scrutiny of cycle networks, which isn't taking place until next January, is it? So, yeah, okay.
Okay. Then the next one, COVID-19 business recovery update. Well, yes, this was always going to be on the agenda, and we've got that on for October 2021. And that's again growth and development. I shouldn't think anyone has any objection to that. You're frowning, Councillor Clark. Is that all right?
No, oh no, I'm not.
Use the expression there, Chairman. Use the expression.
Yeah. Well, that's because I was concentrating very hard. You see, that's taking it very seriously. Yeah. Well, and blimey. Business recovery, it is very serious anyway, so from COVID-19, so absolutely, definitely and utterly yes.
Does anybody have anything?
Sorry, if I could,
Sorry.
the only thing is October going to be too soon? I don't know. Just depends. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 3-4 months, do we, in terms of COVID, but let's work on the basis. I think a lot has happened already. So even if there was another wave coming, I think there's still probably plenty for us to look at and possibly help provide some lessons for any future wave that does, let's hope it doesn't, but if it was to occur again, hopefully there are some lessons that we can have learned.
Peter, I think you indicated.
Yeah, well, just I think you touched on a key word, Councillor Cumberland, and that was the word flexibility, and obviously us being fluid and flexible with regards to this. It's not all set in stone as it was proven last year when things were moved about. So yeah, also we'll keep a watching brief on this, and obviously keep revisiting it.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think we've complied really with the recommendations of reviewing the work plan and considering the matrices. Has anybody anything they want to bring forward for consideration for scrutiny? I'm again lobbying for planning consultation.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that perhaps there is an ongoing thing about looking at planning and how applications are processed and etc.
So I'm compiling my matrices as we speak, and I'll be sending that in. All right. So we now move on then to agenda item number 6. What's the time? Oh yes, I've just got to keep an eye on this time. Yeah. Laura, can you give me a heads up when we've got 5 minutes, in 5 minutes time, in fact, so that I can
That's fine.
give us a break, a 10-minute break. Right. So we're moving on then to finance and performance management. And I believe this is Charlotte and Sarah who will be presenting this.
That's right, but Sarah's going to go first.
Right. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. So the Q3 position report is at the 30th of December, and following previous formats of the Q1 and 2 reports, the COVID variances are highlighted separately. The data that's included within this Q3 assumes full lockdown to the end of March and covers further lost income, costs and grants in addition to in-year efficiencies. The budget variance, projected budget variance now sits at 721,000 efficiency, and this is as a result of more grants, particularly for income loss, council tax and leisure funding. Given ongoing uncertainty and future use of organisation stabilisation reserve, as stated in the recent budget report to full council, resources will be needed to navigate the council through extremely choppy waters. Table 1 at page 4.2 on pages 38 and 39 shows that we have lost income resulting from COVID of 1.14 million and associated costs of 1.986 million, relating mostly to leisure. We have savings and grant funding, bringing the net efficiency to 254,000. We have in-year efficiencies totaling 860k, and these are summarised. Taking into account business rates, the overall net budget variance is 721,000, and this is also detailed at Appendix A on page 49. On page 51 to 54, Appendix B details the variances, both favourable and adverse. The main favourable variances being rental income, garden waste, investment income and bank charge corrections, with the majority of the adverse lost income relating to Parkwood and the leisure services. Paragraph 4.7 on Appendix E shows the special expenses position, and this has also been affected by COVID and currently projected to be 87,000 loss, and this is net of a proportion of the recovered lost income grant that the council has received. This deficit is going to be funded by a loan that's been agreed by Special Expenses and Community Infrastructure Levy Group, and we will revisit this position at a separate budget session later in the year. Paragraph 4.7 and Appendices C and D show the projected underspend on capital of 7.3 million, namely resulting from Bingham, Hub, the crematorium and the asset investment strategy. Paragraph 4.11 to 4.15 updates the group on COVID-related issues that were reported at Q2, namely that we have been working closely with the leisure provider and have been successful in an application for additional funding. It was originally 210,000, but we've been since awarded an extra 14,000, bringing the total to 224. Our multi-asset values reported at the start of the year had improved by 1.065 million, but there is still a risk that this can fluctuate throughout the year. There's a shortfall in cash on the collection of council tax, and any deficits are to be spread over 3 years. The current position on the deficit of council tax collection of cash is now at 180,000. We've had one payment so far from the income reimbursement scheme. This is for lost fees and charges income, and we're expecting a further 0.4 million to the end of the year. In conclusion, the projected position has improved at Q3. However, the impact of COVID will likely affect future years. The levels of reserves will be impacted with the next 2 years' budgeted deficits totaling 1.5 million. And this positive variance will ensure reserves remain healthy and we can support negative budget impacts. Delays in capital receipts are offset by slippage in the programme, meaning there is no need to externally borrow this year. There's still lots of uncertainty surrounding business rates, comprehensive spending review, fairer funding and Brexit, which can potentially cause financial pressures, and therefore the council's financial position will need to be closely monitored. All reported to full council when setting the budget. A year on from the start of the pandemic, finances are not as healthy, but could be a lot worse, and we can't be complacent. With that, I'll hand over to Charlotte.
As it's now 5 minutes to 8, I'll ask Charlotte to come back after 8:05. We will now have our break in order to acknowledge the National Day of Mourning. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. Laura, can you start my video, please?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Oh, we can see Sarah.
Apologies, I hadn't realised that the camera wasn't on the entire time.
Yes, we were listening to the blank screen.
You're listening to a blank screen. Yeah, I'm back now.
Right, are we all back? Is everybody back? Right, okay. What I should say before moving on to Charlotte, rather than leave everything to the end, does anybody have any questions for Sarah on her presentation? No? Well, we'll move on to Charlotte then.
Well, good. I think I will. I'd like to have no questions as well, please, if that's okay. To be perfectly honest, there isn't a great deal to report on performance. You'll remember at the beginning of this year, of course, we took out a lot of the targets or indicators that we knew were going to be impacted by COVID. So you'll see from page 43 of the report onwards, in the strategic scorecard, whilst things are progressing in terms of tasks, perhaps not as fast as we anticipated 12 months ago, there are no exceptions anywhere for tasks or performance indicators. And in fact, on the operational scorecard, there is only one exception, which is householder planning applications processed within their time limits. The explanation for that exception is on page 76 of the document, but refers to the number of strategic, big scale, the major applications that we've had in over the last couple of months, which means that the officer time has been redirected to making sure that we get them off to a good start and process them as quickly as we possibly can. The householder applications are still going through, though at a slower rate. So whilst it's unfortunate if you happen to be a householder with a planning application in there, they are going through, just not as quickly as we had hoped. But the really important major strategic sites obviously are being pushed through as quickly as we possibly can, given the circumstances in which we are trying to operate at the moment. I think the only other thing that I wanted to bring to Councillors' attention was a new appendices which we have included. Let me just flick through my document to get the page number for you. It starts on page 81. What we were aware of was just trying to show you what impact COVID had had on some of those key indicators that we're monitoring internally. It's a bit difficult to see in the tables with the arrows that go up and down and such, like it's just a figure. Hopefully this document right at the end of the appendices here gives you a bit more of a flavour of how performance has been affected by COVID, showing you in some of these key areas performance this year against performance for last year, and a little bit more narrative than perhaps you're used to seeing. These aren't exceptions. They're not problem areas in any way, shape or form, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what officers are dealing with in terms of performance and how that is being impacted by COVID. Now, I'm quite happy to open the floor up to any questions, and I was only joking about there not being any. I'm happy to answer any that you have.
Councillor Clark.
It was just one thing, Chairman, that page 73 relating to household waste and residual waste, etc., etc. And I'm not quite sure whether that's just impacted by, I've just realised I've probably misread the figures. But I suppose my overriding question was, can this actually, will this be part of our scrutiny of the waste strategy, or would it be part of that? Because I am concerned that our recycling rate just generally is on a downward trend from X number of years ago, and maybe by scrutinising the waste strategy, whether there's a way in which we could try and reverse that trend, especially, I mean, we should all be looking at green issues in some shape or form, and hopefully there's a way of reversing this trend, because we should be increasing our recycling rates, not reducing them. So I suppose my basic question is this part of scrutiny of waste strategy?
It certainly can be, Councillor Clark. I think one of the concerns about these figures at the moment, the reason that the recycling figure looks like it's going down is because actually the one below it is going up. So because of COVID, everybody's working at home, nobody's eating out, we're all very much home-based at the moment. The residual waste in terms of the tonnages of grey waste that we've picked up has massively gone up in the last 12 months. Because of that, the amount of recycling appears to have gone down, but has actually stayed steady. So what I would say there is that, yes, it is part of the scrutiny, hopefully, that will be coming forward. Some of the things in the Waste and Resources Bill that we're expecting to see include things like a weekly collection of compostable household waste. So this is your potato peelings and your carrot peelings and such like. Now, the logistics of that is down to the county and how they're going to dispose of that, but that's what we're expecting to see. And that, of course, will increase our recycling rates, as would things like fruit and veg punnets and such like, all of which appear to be in the bill as it stands at the moment. So recycling and what we are able to recycle in this local area is definitely going to be part of that scrutiny.
Thank you.
Very good. Anybody else?
Mr. Linfield's got his hand up.
Sorry? Councillor Bansal.
Was there somebody else as well?
Yes, did you say?
Peter Linfield has.
Oh.
Do you want to come first, Mr. Linfield?
Yeah, well, I think I was first, so I will go first. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, just start on the waste. Just refer to page 85 as well, Councillor Clark. And you can see there, going back to the graphs as well, there's other issues like green waste and how that's increased. So there's all these other issues that will link to the same sort of agenda. But if you read that, so that's at page 85, gives you a bit more information surrounding the waste collection, which hopefully articulates the current position.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that, Councillor Bansal.
That's okay. Just a quick one on that same page. The third one down, combined number of social media followers, page 73 again. But with COVID, there's a lot of folk using social media to get information. And I know the council are doing an excellent job in terms of putting information out on social media, all forms of social media. Could we get a bit of context around that in the future at some point, or kind of more of a deep dive in terms of engagement? How many residents are now engaging with us on social media, asking questions, and moving more to a, I don't like saying this, but a digital environment or communications. And I know the Borough Council are recruiting a new communications manager as well. And how does all this kind of link in?
That's absolutely fine. Just to clarify there, it's new communications officer. One of my team is leaving and moving on to newer pastures. But yes, certainly I can bring some more detailed information. We obviously monitor that kind of thing internally, so that's not a problem, and I will bring it to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? So are we all happy with the report? Yeah. And we therefore agree the recommendations. Oh, Councillor Verdi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My apologies. I'm actually going to backtrack slightly. I did have a couple of questions for Sarah, actually, and technology let me down, so things had moved on before I managed to get my electronic hand up. So I do apologise. But Sarah, if I may, very, very quickly, three things. On page 40, there are references to adverse variance. Sorry, there are references to adverse variances, and Parkwood being one of them, 1.225 million, paragraph 4.15. The question I have is just in terms of how far ahead, if we have, are we projecting the deficits in terms of the requirements of Parkwood Leisure, and how that's been profiled into our future budgeting. The second question is on page 42. Paragraph 4.14. In there, we have mention of council tax receipts obviously going down, but mitigated by business rates going up by 2.7% or 3.37 million. And that coming from one major business rate payer. So again, although that's positive on the position that's been presented here, the question I have is in terms of impact on our future profiling. So if that ratepayer has paid effectively what is an advance payment, I'm just wondering how we are modelling that into the future impact of recognising that income now, and therefore potential deficits in the future. And finally, really wrapping all of that up, there is, for example, the comprehensive funding review that you refer to, amongst other things, whereby there have been delays, the impact of Brexit and so on. So the question is really centred around, we've got deficits on our council tax, we're using stabilisation reserve at the moment. I suppose the question is around assurance in terms of, are we storing up quite a lot of current stresses for the future, and if there's any mitigation, longer term mitigation, which is being planned? Because I think it's reasonable, it's understandable how we're managing the current budget profiling and looking at the deficits or the variances, positive and negative, to take us through the current period. But my question in all of those areas, I suppose, is around the longer term trajectory. And what mitigation we're taking. Sorry, that's quite a long question with 3 different elements, and you thought you got away with it, Sarah, but I apologise. I've had to use the technology.
Okay, that's fine. No, I did. Thanks very much, Councillor Verdi. So your first point about Parkwood and the budgeting forward for that, I can confirm that the negotiations with Parkwood in reference to the future potential reductions going into next year has been factored into the budget that was approved earlier on in March. Business rates, you referred to the one large payer, and that is actually a backdated payment rather than a future payment. But in relation to the reductions in those receipts, we have modelled those sort of worst case scenarios into our planning, into the budget scenarios, so that the income that we're projecting and the budget positions that we're projecting in the budget report, so the 1.5 million over the 2 years, does take into account a worst case scenario in our business rates, which was also referred to in the budget report. And your final point on the comprehensive spending review, excuse me, and some assurance on the risk with those. I mean, we do monitor the situation. We're involved in consultations with these changes that they propose to make. And again, we're planning to replenish our reserves over the medium term to mitigate against any possible risks that these changes may have in our budgeting.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think that covers my points. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. That's very reassuring, Sarah. Thank you very much. So going back to the recommendation, nobody has anything they wish to say in terms of what we've just heard. We all agreed with the recommendation. Nobody has anything they wish to disagree with. In that event, I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. And thank you for your forbearance of the 10-minute break. And see you next time.